Okay, in this video I'm going to be replacing the Shimano HollowTech crankset on this bike. What I'm actually going to be doing is replacing the 172.5mm cranks with shorter 165mm versions of exactly the same Shimano 6600 Ultegra, because apparently I have short legs. So we're going to, what we're going to do will apply to basically all HollowTech, Shimano HollowTech cranksets, with small minor variations between the different models and generations. You will need this Shimano tool. The relevant bit to this job is the little plastic star-shaped wheel at the end, which allows you to remove and then retighten the plastic load cap, which is located on the left-hand crank. The rest of the tool is for removing the bottom bracket, and we're not going to cover that in this video, but it's handy to have anyway. So the first thing to do in the removal process is to loosen the pinch bolts, which are socket hex head bolts. You need a 6mm Allen key for this. Fairly simple, just loosen them one at a time, one after the other. They can be quite tight. They may require a bit of strength. Be prepared to have sore fingers if you're using a small Allen key like this one. And just remove them and put them somewhere safe. Remember that they have the little washers attached to them. Don't lose the washers. Then use your special Shimano tool to remove the locating cap from the left-hand crank. You just turn that anti-clockwise as you would any normal bolt, and it unscrews fairly easily. Now, on a lot of these HollowTech cranksets, there is a plastic safety tab, which is located in the gap between these two sections of the crank arm, which needs to be removed. You just sort of fold it out of the way using a screwdriver tab or something like that. On this case, on both my new and my old cranksets, it wasn't present, so I don't know if that's specific to the model or whether it's just missing. And once you've removed the pinch bolts, the plastic safety tab, if there was one, and the locating cap, then the crank arm is now free and can be pulled off. Now it may be very stuck, especially if it's been on there for a long time. There's nothing really for this but to give it a good pull. When you do pull, you want to pull from a location on the crank arm which is as close to the axis of the bottom bracket as possible. If you pull from further up the crank arm, then you're applying a lever, a torque to the axis, and it's just going to actually grip tighter the more you pull. So try to pull in a straight line parallel with the axis. And once that one's free, you can think about removing the right hand crank along with the chain rings. To do that, remove the chain off the inner chain ring first. Just drop it onto the bottom bracket shell and then push it out. In my case, it was quite loose and very easy to push out. If it's at all stuck, which it might be on the same way that the left-hand crank arm was on this bike, then you can just give it a gentle tap, either with a soft mallet or use a block of wood and a regular hammer, just a bit of a tap, and it'll come out. Alright, and once you've got both sides of the crankset out, you can set about cleaning them, give everything a bit of a wipe down with a rag. And I wouldn't object to putting them in the dishwasher for a few runs if you have one. I don't want to use degreaser on a crankset because there are seals at either side of the bottom bracket access, seals which go up against the walls of the bottom bracket bearings in order to provide waterproofing. So we don't want to risk damaging them with a degreaser. So once everything's clean, we're going to apply either anti-seize or grease, ideally anti-seize, to everything that's of relevance. This is a nickel-based anti-seize. Usually the common anti-seize that people use is copper-based, so that's fine. So you want to apply it to the sections that are going to be against the bottom bracket bearings and the splines on the spindle where the left-hand crank arm mounts, and on the inside face of the left-hand crank arm where it mounts against the bottom bracket bearing. You can see the seal there, by the way. The reason for all this anti-seize is to prevent corrosion, and it's to help with waterproofing, and it's to help with the mechanical assembly, and it just sort of avoids damage when we put things together and take them apart. And we're also going to apply anti-seize to the plastic surfaces of the bottom bracket bearings where all of this stuff is going up against. Same on both sides, obviously. Then when we're ready, we can mount the drive side crank. Put the chain back on the bottom bracket shell if it isn't already, so that you can easily transfer it to the inner chain ring. Just gently slide it into position. It should go quite easily, especially with the anti-seize in place. You can put the chain back on the inner chain ring at this point if you want. And now we remount the left-hand crank arm, which goes onto the splines on the spindle. Now it will go one of two ways, 180 degrees. You can't get it in an incorrect angle other than putting it completely around the wrong way, which I suppose you could do if you were working on your friend's bike just as a prank. And we're going to use the plastic loading cap to actually push it up against that edge. For now, you can put the pinch bolts back into position. Now this is something that definitely does need to be anti-seized. These bolts are steel or stainless steel, and they're going into an aluminium crank, which is vulnerable to having its threads stripped, especially at small sizes like this. So you must absolutely use anti-seize. It prevents galling on the threads and helps prevent damage. And it also helps, of course, to prevent corrosion in the future, which means that they won't seize. Don't do these tight yet. We're just putting them into position, basically. We'll tighten them after the cap loading screw has been done up. Now we put the plastic loading cap back in position. What this does is it locates the crank arm, which is basically, laterally mobile on the spindle, which you've just put it back onto. It locates it against the bottom bracket bearing edge. It's only to locate it, it's not to provide any pressure. It's a common mistake apparently for people to over tighten this. Now your bottom bracket bearing is designed to withstand force in a vertical direction, not a lateral direction. So if you create a bunch of tension laterally on the bottom bracket bearings, you will subject them to fast and premature wear. So you must not over tighten this, and the trick is to do it up, tighten it with the special tool, obviously. Once you feel it's tight, you back it off, loosen it essentially, and then you nip it up just a little bit, and that's it. That's all you do. Don't tighten it any more than that. Once you've done that with the locating cap, which is now obviously located the left-hand crank arm in the correct position, you can do up the pinch bolts. Now this is where you need to be a little bit careful not to go stripping threads, because you are dealing with small 6mm threads in aluminium. It's not like 18mm threads for pedals, for example. So if you use too much leverage, you will strip them. If you're using a small Allen key like the one shown here, then you should be fairly safe. It's when you get the long-armed ones, that's common in a lot of bike shops, that you can easily do damage. So be careful. What you want to do is alternate here. You do up one until it's starting to get tight, then do up the other to the same tightness, switch back to the other, and just keep alternating back and forward until you've got them to the level of tightness where you're happy. So yeah, with this little Allen key, I'm using sort of finger and hand tight strength to do the final tightness, and that's quite sufficient. Okay, crankset serviced or replaced. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was useful for somebody out there. Good luck. Stay safe.